Imagine digging in your backyard, maybe just planting a simple garden, and your shovel hits something hard. You brush off the damp soil, and you find a rock that glimmers with a strange, heavy warmth. It is solid gold. Now imagine that it is not just a single, isolated rock, but an entire mountain of the stuff, practically bleeding out of the earth, begging to be taken. Most of us today would immediately think we just solved every single problem we would ever face in our entire lives. But what if I told you that this exact scenario played out thousands of years ago, and instead of bringing eternal paradise, it completely and utterly erased an entire civilization from the face of the earth? We are talking about an ancient kingdom that became so incredibly wealthy, its mere existence sounds like a wild fairy tale fabricated by greedy explorers sitting around a campfire, yet the physical evidence proves it was entirely real. Before this fateful discovery, this was a society that had figured out how to live in perfect, quiet harmony with a harsh environment. They thrived in a place where mere survival was already a daily, exhausting challenge. They had built incredibly strong agricultural terraces, fostered a tight-knit community where everyone had a specific role, and developed a culture rich in art, music, and tradition. Then, everything turned upside down on one random afternoon. Someone, perhaps a humble farmer, clearing land or a lost hunter tracking game, stumbled upon a massive vein of gold exposed by a recent landslide deep in the unforgiving mountains. And the weirdest part of this whole story is that they did not even care about wealth at first. For these ancient people, gold was just a soft, pretty metal that happened to catch the sunlight in a beautiful way. They used it to make simple, delicate trinkets, maybe decorated a few ceremonial tools, and genuinely thought nothing more of it. But human nature is a funny thing, and word travels remarkably fast, even in the disconnected ancient world. Soon, their tribal leaders realized the sheer, mind-boggling volume of this discovery. We are not talking about a few shiny nuggets hidden in a riverbed. We are talking about literal mountains of gold, veins so incredibly thick and pure that you could carve them out of the rock with the most basic stone tools. It was an endless, glittering ocean of the most coveted metal in human history, just sitting there in the dark, waiting to be claimed. Within a single, chaotic generation, this obscure, peaceful kingdom transformed into an absolute powerhouse of unimaginable wealth. They completely stopped focusing on survival and started focusing entirely, obsessively, on extraction. Every single able-bodied person was suddenly pulled from the fields and sent into the dark mines. The natural sounds of singing birds and flowing rivers were quickly replaced by the deafening endless echoes of heavy pickaxes striking rock day and night without pause. They pulled thousands upon thousands of pounds of raw gold from the earth, stacking it in their cities until the streets practically glowed in the moonlight. It felt like an ultimate blessing from the gods, a final reward for their centuries of quiet, hard work. But there is a dark detail that nobody ever talks about when it comes to sudden, massive wealth. The earth simply does not give up its deepest treasures without demanding something terrifying in return. And this kingdom was about to pay a price so horrific, it would literally wipe them from the pages of human history forever. Here is where things get incredibly strange and completely defy human logic. You would naturally assume that having access to unlimited gold means you can buy absolutely anything, build the greatest monuments, and easily conquer anyone who stands in your way. And for a brief, blinding moment in time, that is exactly what happened to these people. The rulers of this kingdom went completely mad with the reality of their new power. They commanded the construction of colossal palaces adorned with massive, heavy golden plates that reflected the sun so brightly they could blind you. They crafted massive, life-size statues of their ancient gods entirely out of solid gold, placing them in the center of their sprawling plazas. Even the lowest, poorest members of their society began wearing heavy golden necklaces, thick bracelets, and ornate rings as if they were made of cheap twine. Word of this impossible, glowing city of gold eventually spilled far beyond their mountain borders, reaching the greedy ears of foreign traders, nomadic tribes, and distant, powerful empires. Suddenly, the kingdom was no longer an isolated sanctuary. Endless caravans of foreign merchants traveled across brutal, scorching deserts and treacherous, freezing mountain passes just to get a glimpse of this impossible wealth. They brought with them exotic, intoxicating spices, incredibly rare fabrics, highly advanced weapons forged from harder metals and strange new technologies. The kingdom enthusiastically traded away their gold by the absolute ton, barely making a scratch in their seemingly infinite underground reserves. They felt completely untouchable, like gods walking among mortals. They hired massive, ruthless mercenary armies from neighboring lands to protect their expanding borders, firmly believing that absolutely no one could ever touch them as long as they could keep paying the bills. But as the years went by, a quiet, insidious rot began to spread deep through the very heart of their society. Think about it. When every single person in your kingdom is entirely focused on digging up shiny rocks, absolutely no one is planting seeds in the dirt. No one is harvesting the seasonal crops. No one is maintaining the delicate irrigation canals that had kept their people alive through brutal droughts for centuries. The skilled farmers had completely abandoned their ancestral fields to strike it rich in the dark mines, and the master artisans had entirely stopped making practical, everyday tools, focusing only on crafting intricate luxury items for the bloated elite. They had completely forgotten the absolute most basic, unbreakable rule of human survival: you cannot eat gold. At first, they masked this terrifying problem by simply buying all their food from the visiting foreign traders. They would casually trade a handful of heavy gold for simple wooden carts full of basic grain, genuinely thinking it was the greatest deal in the history of the world. But foreign merchants are not stupid. They are businessmen. They quickly realized that this isolated kingdom had infinite gold, but absolutely zero ability to feed its own people. So the merchants started raising their prices, slowly at first, just testing the waters, and then exponentially. A simple loaf of bread that used to cost a single cheap bronze coin suddenly cost a massive chunk of solid gold. It was the ancient world's first and arguably most devastating case of hyperinflation, playing out in brutal real-time centuries before the concept of economics even existed. The incredible wealth that was supposed to elevate them into paradise was actually suffocating them, turning their once thriving society into a hollow, fragile shell of glittering starvation. And the psychological toll this sudden realization took on the general population was absolutely devastating. Imagine waking up every single day and living in a sprawling city where the very streets are lined with the most valuable, coveted metal on earth. Yet you have to watch your own children crying from the agonizing pain of starvation. It completely breaks the human mind. The strong social fabric that had held the kingdom together for countless generations began to unravel at a truly terrifying speed. Neighbors who had lived peacefully side by side for decades suddenly turned on each other with brutal violence over a single sack of rotting flour. Paranoia quickly became the new state religion. The elite ruling class, finally realizing that their infinite vaults of gold were rapidly becoming completely worthless, started aggressively hoarding whatever physical, life-saving resources they could find. They violently locked away the remaining grain, the clean drinking water, and the effective weapons, retreating into their heavily fortified golden palaces. They coldly left the common people to fend for themselves in a kingdom that was rapidly descending into utter madness and chaos. To make matters infinitely worse, the leaders grew increasingly terrified of their own hired protection. They realized that their massive mercenary armies were heavily armed, highly trained, and guarding a starving, physically weakened population. The kings knew it was only a matter of time before these mercenaries decided to simply kill everyone and take the endless mountains of gold for themselves. So, driven entirely by fear, the rulers began assassinating their own generals in wild fits of paranoid delusion. They completely shut down their massive city gates and heavily sealed their borders, effectively turning their glittering, wealthy paradise into a massive, heavily fortified death camp. Absolutely no one was allowed in, and much more importantly, no one was allowed out. But locking the heavy wooden doors could not stop the terrifying monster they had already unleashed inside their own walls. The common people, completely desperate, starving, and pushed past the brink of human endurance, finally began to violently rebel. Massive riots erupted in the long, dark shadows of the towering golden temples. The once peaceful miners, armed only with the heavy blood-stained pickaxes they used to extract the cursed wealth, stormed the lavish palaces of the corrupt elite. Human blood was violently spilled on smooth floors made of pure, solid gold. It was an incredibly cruel, dark irony. They were surrounded by enough unimaginable wealth to buy the entire known world 10 times over, but they were hopelessly trapped in an isolated valley of death entirely of their own foolish making. The desperate rulers tried to restore order by literally throwing more gold at the problem, offering massive, unbelievable bounties to anyone who would defend the falling crown. But it was completely useless. When true starvation sets in and death is knocking at your door, gold instantly reverts to what it originally was at the very beginning of our story. Just a cold, shiny, impossibly heavy rock. People started throwing their priceless golden jewelry into the muddy streets in absolute disgust. The very thing they had worshipped, the very thing they had willingly sacrificed their ancestral way of life to obtain, had become a sickening symbol of their own impending doom. It is deeply chilling to think about a highly advanced society actively hating the wealth they once prayed for, watching their entire civilization crumble into ash while sitting comfortably on a throne of unimaginable riches. But the collapse of this once great empire was not just economic and social. The earth itself began to turn violently against them in ways they could never have anticipated. This is the part of the story that modern historians and archaeologists usually overlook in favor of the shiny treasures, but it is perhaps the most terrifying aspect of their downfall. Ancient mining on this massive, unprecedented scale was incredibly dirty, highly dangerous, and exceptionally destructive to the natural world. To extract the deepest, purest gold from the stubborn rock, they had to use incredibly intensive techniques that involved crushing massive amounts of raw stone and washing it with dangerous chemical-heavy processes to fuel the massive, roaring furnaces required to constantly melt and purify the endless streams of gold. They systematically started cutting down entire ancient forests that surrounded their valley. Without the deep roots of the trees to hold the earth together, massive, catastrophic soil erosion began to choke their vital rivers. The once crystal-clear mountain streams that had provided fresh drinking water and safely irrigated their crops for centuries quickly turned into thick, toxic, suffocating mud. Worse yet, their deep, relentless mining unearthed highly toxic heavy metals like lead, mercury, and arsenic, which are naturally found sleeping right alongside deep gold deposits. These invisible, silent killers quickly seeped deep into the kingdom's groundwater supply. So not only were the people actively starving to death, but they were now being slowly, painfully poisoned by the very water they desperately drank to stay alive. A horrific, mysterious sickness quickly swept through the lower classes like a wildfire. People began mysteriously losing their teeth. Their hair fell out in large clumps, their skin broke out in terrible lesions, and their minds rapidly deteriorated into violent, terrifying hallucinations. The desperate high priests of the kingdom, completely ignorant of heavy metal poisoning, loudly claimed it was a terrifying curse from the gods. They preached that it was a brutal divine punishment for greedily ripping the sacred, shining metal from the dark womb of the earth without permission. In a truly desperate attempt to appease these angry, invisible gods, the terrified rulers resorted to the darkest, most horrific of ancient rituals. They actually began sacrificing their own sick people, brutally offering them up on towering altars made of the exact same gold that was secretly killing them. The skies above, the city grew permanently dark with the thick, choking smoke of continuous funeral pyres. The air constantly smelled of sulfur, burning wood, and the unmistakable stench of death. It was a literal, undeniable hell on earth, heavily gilded in the most beautiful, coveted metal known to man. The incredibly small surviving population, completely broken by rapid disease, relentless starvation, and paralyzing fear, simply gave up the will to live. The frantic mining finally stopped completely. The great roaring furnaces went entirely cold. The once bustling, chaotic markets fell dead silent. A profound, incredibly heavy quiet settled over the entire ruined kingdom. The grand, sprawling palaces, once echoing with joyful music and the laughter of the elite, were now just massive, silent tombs filled with glittering, decaying corpses. The lush environment they had greedily destroyed to get the gold had completely and utterly collapsed, leaving behind nothing but a barren, toxic wasteland that could absolutely no longer support human life in any form whatsoever. So what exactly happens when a massive, incredibly wealthy empire just stops breathing all at once? The brave foreign merchants who eventually dared to brave the dangerous journey to visit the kingdom many months later were met with a sight that must have instantly frozen the blood in their veins. The massive, towering wooden gates of the city stood wide open, completely unguarded, creaking in the dry wind. As the terrified merchants slowly walked through the incredibly silent, dusty streets, they did not find the triumphant banners of a conquering foreign army, nor did they find the bloody aftermath of a great, glorious battle. They just found a sprawling, terrifying ghost town. Human skeletons still wearing incredibly heavy, ornate gold crowns lay exactly where they had, collapsed in the dirt. Massive, unbelievable piles of pure gold coins were carelessly scattered across the open market squares, completely untouched, simply because there was absolutely no one left alive who cared enough to steal them. The merchants, completely terrified of the invisible, deadly curse that had apparently wiped out this mighty civilization overnight, desperately took what little food and water they could carry and fled as fast as their horses could run. They spread wild, terrifying rumors across the ancient world of a cursed, haunted city of gold that mercilessly killed absolutely anyone who lingered too long within its glowing walls. Over the slow passing of the centuries, the relentless jungle, or the shifting desert sands, slowly but surely reclaimed the grand, silent city. The deeply toxic rivers eventually dried up into dust, and the earth slowly buried the magnificent golden temples, silently, swallowing the entire kingdom back into the deep darkness from which it had originally pulled its doomed wealth. Today, when modern archaeologists occasionally unearth small, fragmented pieces of this lost, tragic world, the truth is finally revealed. They find breathtaking, priceless artifacts, masterfully crafted golden jewelry, and stunning idols that absolutely belong in the finest museums in the world. But right next to these beautiful, glowing treasures, they always find the massive, horrific mass graves. They dig up the fragile bones of innocent children riddled with severe, long-term malnutrition and catastrophic heavy metal poisoning. It is a deeply haunting, incredibly sad juxtaposition that finally tells the completely true, unfiltered story of this fallen empire. We modern humans always love to look at ancient, crumbling ruins and wonder how such incredibly powerful, advanced people could just seemingly vanish into thin air without a trace. We love to blame mysterious, unknown invaders, sudden, catastrophic climate changes, or completely unstoppable ancient plagues. But the true story of this particular kingdom is actually far more disturbing, because they were absolutely not destroyed by an outside, uncontrollable force. They were entirely destroyed by their own unprecedented, unimaginable success. They actually achieved the ultimate greedy human fantasy, finding completely unlimited, absolute wealth, and it turned out to be the deadliest, most destructive thing that ever happened to them in their entire history. They literally dug their own massive grave, and they enthusiastically lined the entire thing with solid gold. It leaves you sitting there, wondering in the dark. If our modern society were to suddenly discover our own endless mountain of gold tomorrow, a limitless source of whatever it is we value most in this world, would we really have the wisdom to know exactly when to stop digging? Or would we just keep blindly swinging the pickaxe until the heavy rock roof eventually caves in on us all?